it's increasingly feels like this is no longer FIFA's World Cup as much as it is Trump's World Cup. You have a president here who is basically, unhinged, uncontrollable, unpredictable, and extremely petty, and who has probably judged that at this point in the cycle, FIFA needs the US more than the US needs FIFA at this point. I mean, the Men's World Cup is responsible for 83% of FIFA's total revenue. And so it as has become increasingly clear that if when Trump tells FIFA to dance, FIFA are going to dance, and whatever comments he's made about moving games, about security aspects, FIFA have actually not given much serious pushback to any of this at all. They just Infantino has been in the White House nodding along, going, "Oh yes, very good, very good, Mr. President, very funny," and this increasingly appears to be the dynamic that is going to play out over the coming months.
Yeah, I suppose from President Donald Trump's view, he feels that these cities are unsafe. He said previously that he feels that some of these cities that he's talking about, the ones that are in question, have been taken over by the radical left. Miguel, what's your take on this? Do FIFA have a right here to be unconcerned, or should they be doing something? Should they be stepping in this instance?
So there are a few layers to this. I mean, the first being actually most basic, that in fairness, usually in World Cup staging, although there's generally a perception that kind of FIFA railroad governments a bit, although for most modern tournaments up until the last 3 or 4, FIFA the World Cup has taken place in maybe in governments in states where the government hasn't been as overbearing, say. But usually FIFA do actually leave issues like this in security. They naturally leave it to the state and the government because they've obviously got much more information. They have to act on intelligence. The specific issue here and the extra layer is, of course, exactly what Jonathan has mentioned, what you touched on yourself, Jess, about the feeling from within American politics that some of these decisions are being taken for spurious or petty reasons or related to petty political squabbles. And that, of course, there's then another problematic layer in this, which is, of course, Infantino's closeness to Trump, and how this hasn't been a normal government FIFA relationship as we've seen with most. I mean, it's actually unprecedented that the president of FIFA has appeared first of all at Trump's inauguration. I mean, that is something we've never seen before in football. And then even this week when he appeared in the peace talks in Egypt, again, it's going beyond and extremely politicizing to a great degree what is supposed to be, or what FIFA themselves will proclaim as a kind of, a supranational organization. And that's where these discussions become much more complicated, because what would usually be something where FIFA could legitimately say they're just leaving to the state they're in, now everyone is pointing to the deeper connections between that state, or at least, the current ruling government and FIFA and their president.
OK, staying on the topic of the World Cup and turning to the back page of the Express now, Miami advice. The World Cup heat is on, so England turn to Beckham for help. This, of course, around the story that the English FA have asked Inter Miami, I should say, and David Beckham, whether they could host a camp there. They've spoken to a variety of venues by the sounds of it, but the one that obviously piques our interest as the British press is David Beckham's team. Jonathan, it feels as though this sense of heat and the temperatures that the players will have to endure next summer in Canada, the US and Mexico is going to be a real issue. I remember kind of us talking about weather so much ahead of the World Cup in Qatar. Is it going to be the team that deals with the heat the best? Is the team that goes furthest in the tournament? Is it that serious, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think there's a general consensus that it is going to have a certain effect on the kind of football that's going to be played. I think generally, modern teams are pretty good at adapting to heat. Certainly the ones that have experience of international tournaments, of World Cups. I wonder if sometimes the heat issue is sort of overplayed. I mean, footballers are essentially are very good at adapting to conditions, and so are coaches, and so is Thomas Tuchel. In terms of the specific base, I think there are what are the conditions and what are the facilities you're going to encounter. Inter Miami's by all accounts very good, and I think the other factor is is this the sort of place that you want to be? Essentially, is this a place where players are going to enjoy their downtime? That you're going to be able to see a bit of the country, I think, and I think for the guys who cover the England football team full time, who will be going on that trip, they may well be having a little word in the ear of the FA, going like, well, if it's between Miami and, say, I don't know, Kansas City, maybe best go with Inter Miami.
Yeah, of course. All work related, of course. Jonathan, Miguel, thank you for the moment. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll look at more of the sports stories in the morning's papers, including this in the Metro. It's Bruno Fernandes misses Manchester United training ahead of the weekend's massive Premier League game against Liverpool. See you soon.
I can't really think of a kind of a precedent of a title winning team that has essentially replaced half its side, or at least replaced a huge portion of its title winning side, and then try to play in a slightly different way to the style that won them the title, which is essentially what we're seeing. That is hard. That is a period of upheaval that I can't think of a direct precedent for. And there are really specific issues. I don't buy into the issue that Liverpool are in crisis or anything like that. There are obviously very specific issues that the teams are beginning to target the fullbacks. Teams are beginning to aim diagonal crosses at the back post. That they look at a little bit brittle in defensive transition. Those are things that can be fixed. And I think the comfort for them, I guess, at this point is that I don't feel like it's going to be one of those 95 point seasons where losing 2 games is basically fatal, and I don't think this is going to be one of those titles that's won by March or April either. So I think that they are still very much in it, but they are maybe discovering right now just how tough it is.
Yeah, this is a reflection perhaps of how competitive the Premier League is this season, with so many teams aiming for top spot. Miguel, from your point of view, are Liverpool still the favourites, or is there someone else that's taken the mantle?
No, I think it's Arsenal. I have thought that from before the season began. And I think that's primarily actually because of recruitment. Not necessarily because, or not that I expected Liverpool to have these issues, but obviously they are adjusting the way they play. But Arsenal, basically, they've opted for immense strength and depth. And that in a season where, like last year, there's going to be games every 3 days from November to January. I think that's going to have a huge difference over the course of the campaign. And Liverpool do suddenly look a little thin compared to Arsenal, particularly in the centre of the side. And I mean, this is the thing. I mean, Johnny was getting at it there about how they're changing the way they play. And right now, like the fullbacks, that's been one of the certainties about Liverpool, basically for as long as they've been a great side again. And when Jurgen Klopp restored them, with True Robertson and Trent Alexander-Arnold, the fullbacks don't function. The front line doesn't currently function, and that puts even more pressure on what feels like a very thin structure in midfield. So yeah, it all adds up to problems already that maybe we should have anticipated some of them, given they're kind of going through the transition they put off last year. But of course, what's been so striking right now is that they've lost 3 in a row. And okay, for any normal club or non-super club, that happens. When you're the champions, it's rare. And also, as has been pointed out a lot since 2 weeks ago, it's the first time Slot himself has ever experienced this in his career. He's never lost 3 in a row. To be honest, he's actually never really experienced difficulty, which makes this quite interesting. He's almost had kind of a constant upward surge since his early days at Camber in Dutch football. And just on Johnny's point, actually, about kind of the scale of change, because funny enough, I'm actually writing on this for The Independent tomorrow. Bit of a plug there. The only comparable example I can think of as champions is something that Ferguson did a lot, which is, I suppose, just rip up a team after a 3-year cycle. Now, usually did it on down years, like 95 or 98. But in 2001, United won 3 in a row, and that was when he did actually change things. Like, he went from the classic 4-4-2 to bringing in Varane and Van Nistelrooy. And actually, it did encounter difficulties. Of course, there was another factor there, and that was seen as Ferguson's last season at United. But of course, once he announced that he was staying on, they corrected course pretty quickly. I mean, I do think Liverpool will eventually correct course. But I think the interesting dynamic now is whether Arsenal might potentially steal a bit of a lead before they do that.
Yeah. That will be interesting to see how Arne Slot, who's not used to being in this position, reacts to all of this. OK, from Liverpool then to their next Premier League opponents, Manchester United. Trouble brewing, says the Metro, as Bruno Fernandes, their captain, among 4 United regulars to miss training ahead of Anfield showdown. Jonathan, anything here for the Manchester United fans to be concerned about, or is this just a case of managing his minutes?
I think probably the latter. I mean, players come back from international week or international fortnight at kind of different places, different paces, and that they will have gone. Some of them will have gone through long travel, and some of them will just need a bit of a rest. I mean, if Bruno Fernandes isn't available for Anfield, I think that's a huge blow for United, not just in terms of the way they want to play and what he offers on the pitch, but in terms of the psychological boost, I think that will give Liverpool. But we'll wait and see on the team sheets for that. On
the back page of The Sun, a story here. This is an interesting one. Brian Mbeumo trying to convince Carlos Baleba to move to Manchester United, so they say. An exclusive here from Steve Brenner and Catherine Walsh. And of course, we were just talking there, weren't we, about the captain Bruno Fernandes playing in the centre of midfield. Much discussed this season, his position in that team. Might he be playing alongside Baleba at some point, Miguel? What do you make of this story? Brian Mbeumo trying to convince Baleba to join him at United.
Well, it makes absolute sense. I mean, like, we know United badly want Baleba. It could be Amorim above anything. He wants midfielders who are runners that can carry the ball from defence to attack in a quick way that Baleba obviously can do. It was why he was such a primary target this summer. And if not quite a case of the only player United wanted, it was certainly one of the best examples of a particular profile that United wanted. Now, the trouble is they're dealing with Brighton, and because Brighton's data is so advanced, they put a price on a player out of how they expect that player to develop in the future and absolutely don't budge on it. I mean, if United want Baleba, they would really have to pay the sort of fee that he would command at his peak. That's how Brighton think. So this is the challenge. I mean, in terms of Mbeumo convincing him, I wouldn't say convincing him is actually too much of an issue, given Baleba did want to go in the summer. The issue is actually meeting Brighton's valuation. And that's where, of course, Bruno could maybe come in a different way, because, I mean, it has been felt that United might actually have to sell him, or a player like him, to actually afford this deal in one of the next windows. So there's a fair bit of intrigue to that one. But I mean, Mbeumo, it obviously makes sense. Mbeumo himself has fitted in well at United so far, despite inconsistent results for the team. And I suppose despite those results, he can speak positively about what United have been like for him.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what midfield with Baleba at Manchester United would look like. That's certainly an area that Manchester United will want to strengthen in January, if not in the summer. OK, back page of the Mirror then. We're talking Jordan Pickford now. 4 more for Joe, they say, on the left-hand side there as Jordan Pickford, their number one, signs a new 4-year contract. That will keep him at Everton until the end of the 2028-29 season. He's been Everton's number one for the longest of times. He's been England's number one, Jonathan, for the longest of times. I'm almost a little bit surprised that he hasn't gone to one of the so-called bigger six. There's been no major bid for his services. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I wonder on some level whether his success with England has almost kind of hampered him, or maybe pigeonholed him a little bit in this respect. Because he's so able to, as we've seen, raise his game for England in international tournaments. I wonder whether it's almost sort of pigeonholed him as an international specialist, which is unfair, obviously, because he's been very consistent for Everton over a number of years. But I mean, that's the only thing I can think of, because he's been top class and very consistent.
Yeah, he really, really has. And he'll have a big summer, I'm sure, next year at the World Cup for England. OK, Miguel, in your paper, The Independent, you've written an interesting story here. And the headline certainly doesn't mince any words here. Pep's ideology is dead. So where does football go next? Tell us about this.
It's basically about the changes that a lot of us have been discussing in the Premier League this year. A lot more throw-ins or long throws, a lot more set pieces, a lot more counter-attacks, teams prioritising possession less. And I think what's really interesting there is basically because this almost comes a response to a state of play the football has had for 15 years now, which is really that Guardiola's ideology, the positional game, as he calls it, or as it's called, juego de posición in Spanish. I mean, that has been best practice for 15 years in a way that hasn't really been seen. There's never been an ideology so specific that so dominated so much of the game, to the extent that actually by the 2022 World Cup, football was so homogenised that we had Thomas Tuchel complaining about how he was getting bored by it, that too many teams played the same way. Now, what has happened out of that, basically, is that because so many teams play the same way, anyone that does anything different almost has a disproportionate effect. And so I think that's what we're seeing a lot in the Premier League this year. And it certainly means that for the first time in over a decade, there's no best practice. There's no, this is the best potential way to play, given that Guardiola exemplified how if you played his way, you were likelier to be champions. And of course, one of the more interesting things in this is that Guardiola himself is driving the anti-Guardiola movement, because, I mean, just as a basic example, or the most extreme example, the way he played against Arsenal in that 1-1 draw in mid-September, it was essentially Mourinho's approach for Inter Milan against Guardiola's Barcelona in 2010. People would have found that absolutely unimaginable from Guardiola 15 years ago. I do think for Guardiola himself, some of this is circumstantial. He's obviously trying to drill his team in a new way, particularly under the new assistant in Pep Linders. But as I say in the piece, one rival club, or someone at a rival club, described Haaland as the ultimate long ball player, because he's got such physical prowess and you can just get the ball up to him and he will score, as we have seen a little bit this season. But there are wider changes there. And I think it's interesting as in terms of where it goes next, as well as debate over how exciting this actually is, as we have seen less goals this season.
Miguel, thank you very much. Jonathan, Lou as well, thank you for your company this evening and your insights on Back Pages tonight. If you missed any of the show, as always, there's another chance to see Back Pages at hour. The show is also available as a podcast. Just download Back Pages on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can join us